Yeah, I'm live on my channel. So,
All right, just waiting for mine to pick it up.
no problem.
Awesome. All right, welcome to Doulos Theology. Got our first live stream on YouTube today, and I am joined by atheist Stephen Ryan from Cider and Port, and we're going to be talking especially about the burden of proof between atheists and Christians in religious conversations. We've got one or two more topics before that, but before we kick it off, I'll go ahead and let Stephen introduce himself. Tell us a little about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your channel. I know you, but some of my audience might not.
Yeah, so I'm Irish first off, in case you can't tell by the accent. I'm an atheist. I'm a social commentator. I talk about politics. I'm a social democrat, just so that will kind of give you an idea of where I stand. I have a podcast. I have a call-in show. My tagline that has been on Math Pig's channel when I'm kind of introducing myself is, you can find me on the internet anywhere where there is an argument to be had. So
awesome. And for those of you who might know me, might be tuning in for the first time, this is Doulos Theology. We talk about all things Bible, all things theology. We do apologetics, obviously, which is what we're sort of doing here today. Stephen and I have talked, gosh, what is it 7, 8 times by now?
Yeah, probably. Good.
And
a good few
times. We've done the question of does God exist to death by now. So I thought we'd mix it up a little bit tonight and not have the same conversation we've had 20 times again. And we're going to do kind of a little bit more of a niche topic within atheist Christian dialogue. So first of all, I think the first topic that you wanted to talk about a little bit today, and I think this will tie in to our main topic that we're going to be talking about, was it should everybody be an atheist? Is that the one you wanted to talk on for a few minutes before we dove into the main thing?
Well, yeah, the only reason for that is because it's literally, it's just going to take me like a few minutes just to kind of adjust that.
I'll let you have the podium for that.
Yeah, so basically, like, should everybody be an atheist? Like, I think that everybody should follow reason and follow evidence wherever it leads into. The one thing that is kind of the most important not to do is to lead the evidence toward your preferred conclusion. I'm not asking anybody to follow me apart from on Twitter and on YouTube. I don't think that, like, I have all of the right answers. I've been wrong before. I will be wrong again. I just think that, like, reason, a healthy dose of skepticism, and generally just following the evidence where it leads, and not to be biased about it, and not to be open to change, because everybody has been wrong. I've been wrong. Doulos has been wrong about something. Everybody in the audience has been wrong about something, and you don't. And the point about that is that we don't know. Nobody lives their life thinking that they're wrong. Everybody lives their life thinking that they're right. But if a time comes where you need to reevaluate something that you have long decided was right, where you need to change your opinion on that, then you have to be open to that, I think. So should everybody be an atheist? If that's where reason, logic, and evidence leads you to, then yes. But that's just me.
And just a clarifying point, I've never been wrong. I don't know who told you that I have been. It's vicious slander. But no, yeah, you're right. Everybody's been wrong. Everybody thinks that they're right. I think you're correct about that. And if you do want to follow Stephen on Twitter or YouTube, we have his YouTube channel linked down below in the description. I'm sure you can follow that to get to any other social media accounts. Is that right?
It's all there. It's all there, yeah.
So the main topic of conversation tonight, and I think that we are going to strongly disagree on this point, is the question of the burden of proof in religious conversation.
Mhm.
And do atheists have the burden of proof? Do Christians have the burden of proof? Do both have the burden of proof? Since you just talked, I'll go ahead and give my short opening
Sure,
statement
sure,
on
sure,
this.
sure.
I don't even know if I'll go 30 seconds on this.
Yeah.
Um, I think that both parties in any religious conversation hold the burden of proof. Now, I understand that atheism, as you define it, as you understand yourself to be, would be along the lines of lack belief in a god and therefore not making a claim. Am I correct in saying that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in that position, in and of itself, I agree that there's no claim being made. However, in the conversation of asking for evidence, in order to lead to a conclusion, I think that if you parse those words out and if you parse out what's actually being said, there are some inherent worldview ideologies underlying that, and also some inherent worldview claims underlying that. And therefore, before either party can move forward helpfully with the debate, there are some things that need to be proven both by the Christian and by the atheist, and we'll get into what I think those are specifically as this conversation wears on. But what do you have to say to that, Stephen?
Um. Well, it's my opinion that anybody of either side of the debate, as soon as you make a claim, and they it doesn't always have to be the positive claim. So I personally do this all the time. If I run into an atheist who says I know that God does not exist, I'll push them on it just as much, possibly even harder than you guys will, as to be like, okay, how the fuck can sorry, like, uh, am I allowed to swear on your channel? Sorry.
Um, I'd prefer it if you stay away from it, but I'm not gonna like
Okay.
ban you or anything.
Okay. So it's just how I talk. Sorry. I'll try and stop. Where was I?
You said that you push atheists who
Yeah, yeah,
claim
yeah,
to
yeah. Sorry, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'll push them to demonstrate that claim. So if me and you were having a discussion, and I said that I know that a God does not exist, I have made a claim in that statement which holds a burden of proof. But if I just simply say that, like, I live my life as though there is no God, but I don't know 100% either way whether God does or does not exist, I'm open to being proven wrong. I'm open to being shown evidence. I mean, maybe it's just personal bias on my part, because that is the kind of lane that I find myself in. I don't think that there's a claim to that has been made there. That kind of needs to be backed up. Um, Whereas, obviously, if you say that a God does exist, that as I'm sure you will agree, that is a claim which does hold a burden of proof. I mean, if I was to say to you, we've talked a number of times before. You kind of might say, oh, that I'm a generally trustworthy person, right? Just for argument's sake, just
Mhm.
assume that you would. If I was to say to you that last night I was abducted by aliens, taken to a foreign, faraway planet. I was probed and then impregnated and then flown back to Earth, dropped off here, and now I'm here talking to you only several hours later. It doesn't matter how generally trustworthy you would find me. That is a claim which requires a significant burden of proof. It's not just, my word is never going to be good enough. So uh, the evidence that needs to be there in order to substantiate the burden of proof, it depends on each and every claim. Some claims can just be taken at, at word. For example, if I was to say that I have a pet cat, right? Cats are a phenomenally popular animal, and a lot of people have them as pets, so you're more than justified in just taking my word for it. However, if I was to say the, alien quote, it doesn't matter how many times I've told you the truth before. You're going to need more than just my word for it. And if we're talking about the ultimate creator of the universe, who, dictated everything, and who cares where I stick my pee-pee, you're going to need an awful lot of evidence. Like, that's probably like the biggest collection of evidence that we're going to need. So that's kind of where we're coming from, or where I'm coming from.
Yeah, sure. So, it's something that I hear quite often, and you didn't say quite this. And I'm not saying that you would or have made this claim. Maybe you would make this claim. But for example, I hear, for example, talking about the God question. If I'm talking to an atheist, oftentimes I'll hear that compared to something like, belief in unicorns or belief in Bigfoot. That's a parallel that's often brought up, I find, in my personal experience. And so, especially with, like, let's take Bigfoot or even aliens, right? So if I were to say I do not believe in aliens, and someone else was to say I do believe in aliens, I think that the lack of belief in aliens on my part and the inclusion of belief in aliens on another person's part, there's not going to be, outside of that immediate fact, our worldviews aren't going to be too terribly different. Or with Bigfoot, right? So, the sum total of beliefs that we believe about the universe and the way that things operate. One person believes that in the remote forests of Canada somewhere, there's a large mammal that is as yet been elusive to scientific authorities' ability to observe it and document it and whatnot. And I think that that's just bunk. Well, overall, our worldviews aren't that different. Now, when we bring the idea of God into the picture, I think that a worldview which lacks belief in God, broadly defined as an atheistic worldview, so atheistic without God, worldview that is without God, is going to look a whole lot different than a worldview that is theistic and does include a God. And so there's going to be a different metaphysic. There's going to be a different epistemology. There's going to be, a different way that we think about even the most fundamental and basic questions of life, right? So bring that more specifically into a Christian worldview. If I'm being a consistent Christian, living out the principles that I believe that are taught in Scripture and whatnot, every question I ask, I'm going to be running that by the Bible. The basis for my knowledge and the basis for everything that I believe, and this is presuppositionalism, which we've talked about before, and you can see on my channel and some of my other videos. Now that I'm bringing that up, I'll link that down in the description after this all is over. I operate on what's called a revelational epistemology. And so I think that the foundation of all knowledge is, first of all, the Bible, and also along with that, God, what in Reformed theology are called the principium of not only theology, but also all knowledge in general, the most basic fundamental level of everything. Now, if I'm talking to somebody like you, Stephen, who lacks the Bible and God in their epistemology as the most basic fundamental levels of how we ought to be operating and thinking about everything, I think the way that we approach questions is going to be quite different, including the way that we approach questions of, give me evidence that such and such exists, especially give me evidence that God exists. I've been talking for a while. I want to give you a chance to respond to what I've just said.
Yeah, so I guess my kind of biggest there was some smaller things, but I'll just kind of focus on the kind of biggest objection to what you just said. I honestly don't think that the two worldviews, it's a personal gripe of mine. I personally don't see atheism as a worldview. It's
Mm-hmm.
like atheism is like the single answer to a single question, and it does not tell you anything about what like anything else about what I believe. So like there are right-leaning atheists, there are left-leaning atheists, there are atheists who believe in some elements of supernatural, there are atheists like there's we're all over the place, as with Christians, of course.
Yeah.
So yes, I view the world as though a god does not exist, but um I don't think that the way that I'm viewing the world is all too different from how you're viewing it. It would just be kind of like, if I were to kind of ask myself the question of, like, where did all this come from? Where did, like, any of those types of questions, I'm probably going to go with a more kind of like a naturalistic explanation, like such as the Big Bang, just for an example.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you would kind of go back to well, it's God, and it's creation, and it's these sorts of things. Other than that, it would be like kind of more accurate to kind of say that, like, the origin point of where everything kind of came from, that would be the only kind of major difference in how we see the world. But I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I think that we're kind of viewing the same universe.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, I think that is a little bit of a conflation between practically how we operate, which I would agree is not all that different, because we have to live in the same world and play by the same rules of the same world, and less talking about worldviews, which would be the sum total of beliefs that somebody holds about the world. And um, I personally don't think all Christians are consistent in this. This is certainly at the seminary where I'm learning theology right now. This is something we stress quite a bit. This is something in the broader Reformed tradition of theology, which is the brand of theology I hold, going back to Herman Bavinck, Abraham Kuyper, Francis Turretin, John Calvin, people of that sort. I don't know if those names mean much to you.
Some of
But what we would say is that if we're even if I'm talking about this microphone in front of me, this computer monitor I'm looking at, or you, the person who I'm sitting down with having this conversation, if in my core beliefs about those things, if I am not, maybe not consciously all the time, but in the framework of how I'm thinking, if I'm not orienting those things towards the ultimate order of existence and simultaneously the most foundational order of existence, I'm being extremely inconsistent with my worldview. And so the most basic questions I ask about anything when I get down, not on I go and get a drink of water, or what should I put in this box on my tax forms, but when I'm thinking on worldview meta level things, I'm asking how something relates to God broadly. And only once I've answered that question, because God is the creator, God is the one who is sovereign over all things, he's the one that gives everything meaning. If I'm not asking that question first, then I'm walking out of step with my most foundational beliefs, my worldview. Then I've actually taken I'm being extremely inconsistent with what I believe. I need to be asking the question first, what is this thing in relation to God? And once I've answered that question, then I can move a little bit further down the path. So I would agree with you on practical level things. We don't operate all that differently because we have to operate in the same world and we have to play by the same rules. But on a foundational level, when we're thinking on the meta level, since I'm doing that, and I feel safe in assuming you're not, I think our worldviews are fundamentally going to look different. And that, for example, comes across in epistemology, which is where I want to eventually move to in this conversation. When I think about evidence, I think about it in relation to the God who gives meaning to evidence in the first place. And when you're thinking about evidence, I'm not going to make any statement for you other than you're not thinking about it in that way. And so even in the question, how can you prove to me that God exists? There's already a disjointing, things aren't meeting head on. And I think that's a problem that we can't ignore when we're having these conversations.
Okay. Do you have any examples to kind of filter into some of the things that you had said that I'm trying to think of an exact phrasing that you use and it's kind of escaping me. But just to kind of filter in some examples just so I can kind of fully understand kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah. So for example, I'm going to move it to the epistemology section zone, unless you'd like to stay in more of the metaphysical, what things are zone. Would you like, I guess, just getting into deep philosophical words, a metaphysical example or a epistemological example? Which would be more helpful?
Go with the metaphysical.
So I've got a pencil here in front of me. On one level, this is just a pencil. I use it to write. I use it to underline things in my book and write notes as I'm listening to class lectures. This morning, I used it to do a quiz for my Hebrew class. So there are some just basic things about that pencil. But when I'm really thinking on a meta level, on a meta means with in Greek, so alongside, speaking for the audience here. So taking a step back and looking at it on a big picture, I'm going to say that the wood in this pencil was created by God. The person who made this pencil was created in God's image and given the ability to do things like make pencils and think up ideas about pencils solely because they're made in the image of God. God, in his sovereignty, decreed before the foundations of the world that this pencil would be created, that it would find itself in a pencil pack in Walmart down the street from where I live, and it would find its way onto my desk one day. And because of where this particular pencil ended up, if it had ended up anywhere else, it wouldn't have been in accordance with God's plan. But because it is in accordance with God's plan, it's contributing in however small a way, in a way imperceptible to me, but perceptible to the all-knowing God. It's contributing to the greater glory and the greater magnification of his name in all the earth unto the end times, to where if this pencil had ended up somewhere else, God's name would not be as glorified as if it had ended up here. And say the same thing for every single pencil that exists in the world, the pencils on your desk. And so, that's just a brief snapshot of how I plug a item into my thinking about the world. So any thoughts on that? Do you want me to continue?
not ones that you'll be particularly happy about, shall I say?
Yeah,
Uh,
I
I mean, it,
understand. I've seen your social media accounts. You think that's stupid. That's okay. That's why you're on the show and
yeah.
not somebody I agree with.
I mean, yeah, because I mean, like, it's just a pencil. Like it. I don't see how that kind of like how it being predetermined by God that it has to end up on your desk and that it's not going to end up on anybody else's desk. Like, I don't really think that that kind of like means anything. It's just a pencil.
And I understand why you're saying that. Um, but I think that just goes to prove the point in a sense, doesn't it? Um, because I go into this long explanation about a pencil, and this is perfectly consistent with my worldview. I think if any of those long lists of theologians I listed earlier, if any of them had been sitting here listening, they would have been like, these are people I learned this from. They would have been like, "Amen, keep preaching, brother." Except probably none of them would have spoken in that in that cadence. These are old Dutch guys, but however, from your worldview, you think it's absolute malarkey. Um, to steal a term from Joe Biden, uh, and so even on when I plug something into my worldview, when I parse out my beliefs on even something so basic as a pencil, um, there is a lack of meeting of minds in a sense. Um, and so on a practical level, you and I can use this pencil in the same way. Um, on a meta level, I don't think that's possible. And when we're talking about, whether or not God exists or any other conversation within the sphere of religion, if we're not addressing those meta questions, I think from the very beginning we're both going to be going in completely different directions from the very start because we have different presuppositions about all of it.
I mean, yeah, that is true, but I still just don't really kind of like understand like where, and it's not just like you either. It's where anybody would be kind of coming from, saying that like a a, a pencil is somehow like a fulfillment of God's plan, and that like it was always meant to be that way. Because I mean, like if like that's kind of what you're saying, if it's part of God's plan and it was always meant to be that way and it was always going to have to like happen that way, like I don't know if you were kind of planning on bringing this up or whether it's kind of like a little bit of like a side topic now, but I mean, like I don't really understand how you can simultaneously hold that view and also, I presume, accept that free will exists.
Yeah, that is a big topic and it's a side topic. I can talk about that all day, but that might get us a little bit offshore.
Okay.
Um, it's up to it's up to you. I mean, this conversation can move and evolve if we want it to.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you want to kind of give me like
Yeah, this the Cliff Notes version.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you're not gonna like this, and that's okay. Uh, we talk about this as if it's one of the grand mysteries of the faith. This is something that is called by J.I. Packer an antinomy. Anti, you know what that word means. No,
Mhm.
nomi comes from the Greek word nomos, which means law or principle. So two conflicting principles. We use that word to mean two things that are difficult to reconcile, but not impossible to reconcile. We have not reached a point yet in our theology philosophies where we can adequately make sense of it, but we can feel that there's something there. We just can't exactly say how they can both be simultaneously true. You might call that a contradiction. um I think it's in a different category than contradictions, but Calvin taught that and then Jonathan Edwards after him, and then all, all the big list of names, that people have free will insofar as they are never coerced to do anything. So what is it that I do? I always do what I most want to do. If I take a drink of water, it's because I want to take a drink of water. At the same time, God did decree before the foundations of the world that I would take a drink of water right now. But he's not sitting up there pointing at me, I am forcing you to take a drink of water right now. And then all of a sudden my hand moves and I'm trying to stop myself and I can't stop myself. And that's not how it works. So there's simultaneously a decree and us working out that decree according to our own free wills. And how exactly those both meet in the middle, only God knows.
Okay. I mean,
you think that's a contradiction?
I mean, yeah, because like, it's just like, I don't know. It just kind of seems like either God kind of like prescribed it to be this way and that it was always going to turn out this way, or you have the kind of option of, so if it was part of God's plan that, I was going to be on this side of the where am I, on this side of the screen rather than on this side of the screen.
Yeah.
And obviously it's turned out that way, but then but like, if that was always meant to happen, it would be kind of like in the realm of possibility, if you did have free will, that you could have switched how we're orientated in the video. But like, if something is always meant to turn out the way that it is in God's plan, well, then it's always going to turn out that way. It's always going to be that way.
It is.
But then how could, but if you combine that with a being or a deity that is supposed to have all knowledge of past, present, and future, then how can you possibly, then like, I don't understand how you can maintain the idea that you have free will, because free will might, as I kind of said, might be going against what God's like plan is. So I mean, do you have free will, and is God just constantly changing it for all of the 7.8 billion people that are on the planet every time they do something that is against his plan? Or like,
so we're running into different definitions of free will, and the Reformed theology definition of free will, and you'll find Christians who define it completely differently than me, and will probably define it closer to how you're defining it. Our definition of free will is only insofar as it is not coerced. So we're not forced to do something like that we don't want to do. So we're never going to hit the point to where God is using magical forces to make me do something and I'm actively trying to resist it and not able to resist it. We're always doing what we want to do, but it's not free in the sense that, once again, on a meta level, I actually could have, put it on one side or the other. And so it's a very qualified definition of free will. Whereas I would assume the way you're using it, it actually could have been put, like, unless it actually could have been put on the other side of the table, then it's not free will. Or that was a mess, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't know how kind of how much we can kind of delve into this particular topic given the kind of time frame.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I can tell you find it interesting though, or at least debatable.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah, maybe we can revisit that sometime. But oh gosh, I have been eating the mic time. So is there anything you're inclined to say? Moving back towards the topic of burden of proof and whatnot.
I mean, like, if you claim that that something doesn't exist, right?
Yes.
So if I was to say that leprechauns don't exist, which I know was slightly blasphemous given my country of origin, um, but if you were to say that they don't exist, I mean, like, is it is it on me to prove that, they don't, or is it on you to prove that they do, given in this kind of example that you accept the existence of leprechauns? I mean, my kind of idealistic kind of vision of the future is that we don't even have a word for atheist, because you don't have a word for you know a unicornist. Like,
Sure.
you don't have a word for somebody who doesn't believe in unicorns. You don't have a word for somebody who doesn't believe in
Mm-hmm.
pixies, or gnomes, or any of these kind of fairy tale-esque creatures. Now, that's not necessarily to say that I'm equating that to being with your belief. I'm just going to using those as a examples. The point is that, like, you don't have a word for not believing in all of these things. So why is it only God that we have a word that specifically for not believing in it? I think that it should be, if I claim that you know there are such things as unicorns, then it should be on me to prove that they exist. And I'm kind of steadfast in my position on this, which is that, like, if you claim that something does exist, it is on you to prove that it does, and not necessarily on me to prove that it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's certainly an extent to which I can agree with everything you just said, including in the God question. So if we approach a conversation in a debate of does God exist, picture it in a formal debate, even picture it in a casual conversation. If I am going to meet the burden placed on me by the end of that debate, I am certainly going to have to provide good, solid reason in some sense or another that God does exist in order to meet the burden that is on me, right? And
Mhm.
you agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when we get into the question of God, and this is, like I said, this is why I think it's different, because the question of God is, once again, a foundational worldview question. So I how can I express this more clearly? I don't want to say that there is I would disagree on this point, but for the sake of the conversation, I'll stay away from it. I don't want to say that there is an atheist worldview. I do want to say that there are, as if it's one single thing. I do want to say that there are categories of worldviews which include, or which do not include a God, which I would broadly define as atheistic. But if you don't like that terminology, we can stay away from that terminology. So I think that a worldview that does not include leprechauns doesn't look a whole lot different from a worldview that does include leprechauns, if that's the only difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a worldview which does include God and a worldview which doesn't include God are going to look very, very different on a foundational level if you're being consistent. So if you and I being a Christian, you being an atheist, have basically the same worldview, except one of us has a God in our worldview and the other one doesn't, one of us is being ridiculously inconsistent with our foundational beliefs.
Okay.
And so because of that, when we're asking this question and you're telling me, prove to me that God exists, and you're using words like evidence and things like that, I'm going to have to approach this from the point of view of, okay, we're not operating within the same worldview to where mere evidence can bring us to the same point of view. Instead, I have to operate on a meta level and say, I have to bridge a gap from one worldview into another. And at the same time, if you're not doing some work to bridge the gap from one worldview into another, I'm just going to be blowing smoke. And the same thing for you. So if you're cognizant of that and you leave your worldview to come to mine, then you're just going to be blowing smoke, right? So I think you would agree to this. If I were to give you the cosmological argument, right? So everything that begins to exist. Yeah, so this is proving my point, though. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. It's timeless. The whole shebang, right? Well, you're going to say there's quite a bit that you smuggle into that makes that not work, right?
Well, I would just say that nowhere in the Quran does it include the word God.
Right. And so
I mean, like, I would almost agree with what the Kalam says. Insofar as like almost kind of isolating its conclusion, which is that the universe had a cause, but I'm saying that it's the Big Bang, whereas other people are saying that no, that it was God snapped his fingers and said, "Let there be light." Like that's like we just have a difference of opinion on the cause of the universe then. But like nowhere in the Kalam does it specifically say, like, it had a cause. It was God, by the way. Like that doesn't kind of like that's not there. So the whole thing, like the two premises and the conclusion, it never includes the word God.
Believe it or not, there's a surprising number of Christian theologians who, in their theologies, they critique the Kalam cosmological arguments on the exact same grounds that you just did. The point is its inefficiency in bridging a worldview. So I, as a Christian, I include God in my worldview. I start there with the existence of God. Then that doesn't seem like it's smuggling anything in because that's already there for me to exist to begin with. I bridge that over and I speak that into a worldview that doesn't include God. Then all of a sudden I'm smuggling something in, right?
And I mean, I guess so, but like you could just kind of say like, so if both of us were to hear the kalam as it's stated, and I would say, okay, it's the Big Bang, you would say it's God. Like just kind of go back. If we would hear that and we were to both ask ourselves, okay, well, what is that cause? What caused it? Then I would say the Big Bang and you would say God. And therefore we just have a difference of opinion. But then we kind of have to figure, well, we kind of both can't be right. I mean, there's a possibility. I don't think it's very likely, but there is a possibility that we could both be right, that God snapping his fingers was the Big Bang. I don't personally think. The point is that on the face of it, we have a disagreement on what the cause was. And so therefore our next step is to kind of try and figure out which one of us is right.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that going into which one of us is right includes those meta worldview questions. Right. And so that's where it gets deeper, because in a sense, I agree with a whole bunch of what you're saying. I just think we can go one step deeper. And so here, maybe this will lead to some more sharp disagreement, which is what the people are tuning in for, right?
Probably.
So, so when you say that there needs to be evidence for God to exist before you can accept God exists, I think that I have the right to ask you what kind of evidence are you looking for? What would be sufficient? And why is that evidence sensible within the worldview that you're operating under, to where I can import my statements from my worldview into yours and there actually be a meeting of minds? And
say that again? Sorry.
yeah, so I mean, maybe that wasn't the best expressed. I think that when you're asking me for evidence, if we're in a conversation about whether or not God exists, I think that I have the right and even the duty in a conversation like that to ask you a question about what does evidence mean for you, and how is it that evidence is actually sensible in any meaning within your worldview? Like, how is it that evidence can work so that I can give evidence to you and I can trust that it's going to be judged in a fair way, or I can trust that it's going to actually be dealt with consistently at all?
I mean, okay, so the first part of that I would kind of label as like a meaningless question, which is like, do I have a reason for like accepting evidence? I think is kind of like a way of restating what you said. Yeah, I I don't think that like you need a reason for accepting evidence. Like it's you just do it automatically. You don't like you either accept evidence or you don't accept evidence. You don't necessarily need a reason for it. There might be a reason for it, but I don't think that you like kind of need to kind of state ahead of time what that is. The types of evidence that I would accept for a God claim would be kind of um there's a word on this and it's slipping my mind. God, this is showing how fucking tired I am, because solipsism is coming to my mind, which is the completely wrong word to use. Oh God, I can't think of the word. Basically, it's like evidence and evidence only, and it's stuff that like I don't necessarily have to like verify myself. Although if that is like an option, then obviously that's kind of like better. Like I don't necessarily need God to kind of open the clouds and kind of stick his face through and say like I'm here. I don't need God to obviously that would be like amazing evidence, and that would probably convince it. But I think that like if you could kind of get to like the step below that, just for example, right? Something that I accept in science is evolution, right? And there's like different kind of like parts to it. There's the fossil record, there's the DNA, there's all of this sort of thing, and like this is the stuff considering that you have the right stuff that you can verify for yourself. And that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of looking for, I guess, is like something that you have that points that is used as evidence for your God claim that I can independently like view and kind of take a look at myself.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So here's the real rub of it. I and a lot of other Christians.
Empiricism. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. That's
Empiricism.
The word I was trying to
there you
think
go.
of. Oh God, it took me literally until this exact moment. So sorry.
That's okay. Just doing a little bit of a pulling an Internet Explorer there. That's okay. Empiricism. There we go. So the rub of it is, and this is where you and I. This is where we've gotten to in all of our debates in the past, and where things have gotten most heated when they have gotten heated. They haven't always gotten heated.
No,
but
always.
yeah. So I don't think that when you're talking about evidence that way, I don't think that your worldview can provide a framework for evaluating that evidence. In other words, I think that the atheistic worldview can only account for chaos, randomness, and disorder, even on the level of the laws of logic. And so when you're talking about examining and looking at evidence, um, I think that your ability to even judge evidence, while you may have that ability, is fundamentally inconsistent with the worldview that you're claiming to hold by claiming that it does not include a God. And so I think that I have a right to say to you, if you're asking me to prove to you that God exists, fine, but let me ask you first, why is it that evidence can be meaningful in your worldview? Here's why I think it's not meaningful within your worldview.
Yeah, look, it's why I don't think that like atheism is a worldview. Like you can be if I was to say that I was a naturalist
Mm-hmm.
and that I reject all supernatural explanations, and that I only accept, natural explanations for like why stuff happens. How do I kind of put this into an example? It's it's sort of like any kind of, if there was a robbery, right?
Yeah.
In a house, it like doesn't matter. If there was a robbery in some house and for some reason the police make a grave oversight and ask me for their help, and they show me all of the evidence that they have gathered that kind of points to it being this guy, right? Like doesn't these sorts of details I don't really kind of think like matter. The point is you're kind of asking me how in my worldview is the evidence that they are giving me that points to this guy doing the burglary, like how does that, like how can I rationalize that evidence, like how can that evidence be meaningful to me? And I just don't see why you need a god in order to like rational, like, or in order to rationalize that evidence or to understand it. I mean, like either the evidence points to this guy did it or it doesn't. I don't really kind of see the need to um you know tack God onto that.
Sure. I understand you don't. That's not the point of the debate. But so that you can see where I'm coming from on that. So I would plug the category of evidence, just like I did with this pencil, as being ultimately meaningful within the context of the Christian God. And so why can evidence lead us to positions? One, because we're created in the image of God, who is irrational over everything in the universe. He's the one that gives it order. He's the one that gives it meaning. I'm not convinced that without a God, it is possible to assign order and meaning to the universe and remain consistent in doing so. You can posit it, but you can't account for it. And number three, because there is order and existence in the universe caused by the Christian God, we can expect the future to behave like the past. And so because there is a uniformity to nature in that way, we can examine evidence, trust that the way the universe works will continue to work like it has in the past. And so we can take that evidence, make predictions off of it, and come to knowledge based on that evidence. And so I would say that that a worldview which doesn't include a God necessarily doesn't include any of those things. And those being necessary preconditions for meaningfully dealing with evidence, I think that in a conversation, when the Christian brings those things up, and I can even grant the first step in the conversation, the burden is on the Christian to say something. I think, if we're talking about a situation where, you say, you're a Christian. Yeah, I'm an atheist. And the Christian says, I think you should be a Christian too. The atheist says, well, I'm not going to do that until you prove God to me. I'm not saying that the Christian should then therefore say to that, well, you can't prove that God doesn't exist. And then it just turns into a grudge match of, no, you prove it. No, you prove it. No, you prove it. The Christian kind of has the responsibility to speak first in that situation. But I think once the Christian has brought up the concerns that I've brought up, I don't think the conversation can helpfully move forward unless the atheist does some work towards a burden of proof in demonstrating a worldview capable of meeting the challenges that the Christian has brought before it.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying. I guess a helpful question on my end, I guess, would be so extrapolating from like what you have said, and like not even necessarily to kind of put words in your mouth, but just kind of like working backwards from like something else that you have said. If you need God in order to interpret or to make any sort of like meaningful sense out of evidence, for anybody who deals with evidence on a daily basis, so just kind of say just like any random scientist, it wouldn't even matter which field, just any random scientist. And let's just say this, just for the sake of argument, that they do not accept that a God exists. If they live their life in the same way that I am, as if there is no God, is it of your opinion that that a God that the reason why they are able to make sense of evidence is because a God exists? Or like, is it even remotely possible that you are actually able to make sense of evidence and that it is actually meaningful to you in some way without the necessity of a God? Or just as like a third option, sorry, is it that they are making sense of it, or that they are able to work with the evidence that they have, but that it's kind of more likely or very likely to kind of go to an incorrect outcome because they're like not able to make sense of it or whatever?
Yeah, that gets into the question of practicality and meta once again. So I don't deny that on a practical level, atheists can operate, for example, within the framework of the scientific worldview, oftentimes much, much, much more effectively than the average Christian can. You look at people like Einstein, Dawkins, the very effective scientist, Stephen Hawking, all of these people. I would not doubt their practical ability to evaluate evidence, especially in the scientific realm. I wouldn't doubt that one bit. And so it's a common misconception. That's what I heard the first time I heard this view. It's just one of those views that, like my professor said when he was talking about it in class, you just kind of have to hear over and over again until it starts to click. It works that way for everyone. So a clarifying point is, what I'm not saying is that not having a God actually impedes your ability on a practical level to be a logical thinker. In some sense of the word. Rather, what I'm saying is that by not believing in a God, the fact that you are thinking logically can't be consistently accounted for under your worldview. If that makes any sense. Here's a helpful analogy that that Cornelius Van Til, who is a major player in introducing the system that he used. There are beams under the floorboards holding the floorboards up. Now, somebody can say the beams under this floor do not exist, and then walk across the floor and walk across it with the same success as anybody else. But on a level of thinking about why they can walk across the floor, are they able to account for why they can walk across that floor? No, they can't, because the only thing that could possibly account for that beam's holding up the floor. They've excluded that from their system of beliefs, and they walk across the floor anyway. It makes them inconsistent. Now, the person who says there are beams under this floor and then walks across the floor, that person is being consistent, and still doing the same thing to the same effect.
Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm still just kind of struggling with this idea that, like, it's like, sorry, I'm kind of, I don't want to think out loud because it's kind of like rambling. If somebody from like a different religion to yours was to say to you that, well, that was to like kind of say basically the same things as like you have said to me, or that you can't make sense of it, you can't interpret it in any sort of like a meaningful way without Krishna. I mean, like, where do you go in that instance? And like, how do you kind of prove that, like, no, that it's the Christian God that you need in order to to interpret evidence meaningfully?
Yeah. So I've had that question before. I want to give the caveat. My forte isn't world religions. So thinking off the top of my head, what do these religions entail? Oh yeah, that's right. That's not my forte. However, I have dealt like specifically with Buddhism, Hinduism, not Buddhism, Buddhism. Gosh, I'm everywhere tonight. Hinduism before. And I would say that Hinduism fails to meet the internal consistency test, and Christianity does. So, and also, Krishna, a lot of times we can be tempted as Westerners, I think, to import our Western ideas of God into the Eastern idea of God. But the Eastern idea of God is really different. It's way different. And it doesn't say the same things about how God is responsible for and undergirds reality, the same way that Western thought does. And so it's when the rubber meets the road, it's really not one-to-one.
Okay, fair enough. I would just kind of ask only because it's like ridiculously fucking late here, and I'm kind of
yeah. And on that point, just really quickly, we have had a few people in the chat. It looks like there's not as many now. But if there's anybody who has questions, go ahead and type them in now, and we're wrapping up now. We'll answer those questions as they come in. Just a few of them. But okay, go ahead and continue with your point. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, was there any kind of like final questions that like you had to ask me? That was the only thing that I was going to say.
Yeah. I think I've said my piece. I think the only questions I would ask you would get into completely different topics about actually, we've kind of simulated what a Christian and atheist would say in a debate, and then parsed that out, what's going on behind the scenes, but behind both of those things. Now I would actually want to do that debate a little bit more in earnest. And and then take a step back. That's going to take too long. And I see we do have a few more viewers coming in. We're wrapping it up now. If you have any questions to ask, though, if you've been in here before and have heard some of the debate, go ahead and type them in now, and we'll get to those questions as they come in. Do you have any final questions for me, Stephen? Or a final bit to say at the end?
No, I don't think so. Honestly, I think that we've kind of. It's just because like this conversation almost inevitably is going to take us down like a lot of different roads.
Yeah.
And like a lot of different kind of areas to be explored and stuff like that. And it's just kind of because of the time constraints and everything else like that we just like don't really kind of have the opportunity to kind of fully explore this. But yeah, so I think I kind of said like as much as I kind of can say, given the opportunities that it's afforded to us.
Okay, awesome. Well, I will give a few more questions, just a few questions. The only thing that's come in so far is related to the idea of predestination and free will. I'll address these very briefly. So we've got Sama Ramos. So is it like God knows what we're going to do, and because he knows exactly how it'll play out, and because he knows how it will play out, he will make it to somehow lead to his glorification? Thank you for that question. Zach M responded to this, and I think he's straight on. That would be more akin to Molinism, sort of. And I think he's correct in that. The idea that you're getting at, Salma, is that God is learning from something that happened, and in response to the information that he's taking in, he's directing it in a certain way. I think that leads to a number of problems that I don't really have the time to get into now, but I would say that if we're gonna hold it together, a consistent doctrine of God, God has to be not only the cause of all, not only somebody who knows everything, but also the cause of all knowledge. And if we lose that, we lose the sovereignty of God. We lose the aseity of God. And we lose the impassibility of God, all things that really are difficult to look into. And so, yeah, so Zach M said, God isn't looking into the future and learning. He is determining all things sovereignly. Thank you for helping me out, Zach M. And so the Black Doctor, this is actually my co-host on Doulos Theology, Jeremiah. Thanks for tuning in, Jeremiah. What would be the foundation of each of your worldviews? I've already given mine that it's the God of the Bible, and Scripture alongside of that as the Word of God. So the principle of cognition and the principle of essence, God being of essence, Scripture being of cognition. That's the answer that's given by Reformed theology. What's your answer to that, Stephen?
I mean, I know I kind of like briefly mentioned it earlier, but I mean, I am a naturalist. I think that like we can only the tools that are afforded to us right now means that we can only test and we can only investigate naturalistic explanations. We don't yet have a way of testing supernatural explanations. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're never going to have a way, or that we will always never be able to test it, but just as right now we don't. And so that would mean to me that automatically you would be discounting any explanation that would lend itself to the supernatural, because we don't have a way. It could be there's a possibility that a supernatural reason is the correct reason, but just because we have no way of verifying whether or not it is, that we're like, if that is the actual answer or not, that we are forced to only deal with what we can actually test right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremiah. And then we have one more coming in. Last chance to enter in a question to be answered before we end the stream. So do you both do research? And he corrected that typo to debates. So do you both do research and debates to learn, or to prove yourselves right. No disrespect, but as humans, we naturally have bias. 100% agreed. We all naturally have bias. No view is 100% logically held. Every view is to a degree emotionally held. Every belief is, and so we have a little bit of an emotional connection. I research quite a bit. I try to ask questions that I think skeptics would ask of my beliefs. And I also I obviously I do debates. We both do debates. That's why we're here. And so yeah, I do try to challenge my bias. Nevertheless, I'm very convinced. That being said, I think one thing I do not do is I don't pretend that I don't have bias in conversations like this, which is something I think a lot of Christians do. I don't think that's the way to go about doing things. That gets into the presuppositional versus classical apologetic methodologies. We have a video on that. I'll link it down in the description. Stephen?
Yeah, no, so I do research because, and I, delve into these areas because I don't think that anybody wants to hold an opinion that is not correct or that is not rooted in kind of, a bedrock of evidence, or like where all of the evidence is kind of leading to. I think that we, generally speaking, want to believe as many true things as we possibly can. And so if I have an opinion on something that kind of that is a little bit biased, or that I is innate almost, I will try. So my method, every time that I come up with an opinion or a stance on basically anything, I will research immediately all of the arguments that are against what I believe. So just for example, if I was to say that I think that a same-sex couple should be able to adopt, right? That is actually a view of mine. I will immediately go out and I will look at all of the kind of research and all of the evidence that is against that, or that is against me, and see, does it hold up? And if it does, then and if it defeats my argument, then I'll change my mind. And if it doesn't, then I'll stick with the opinion that I have. That's my kind of method, and I do that with everything. That's just one example.
Awesome. And then last one, and I think this is going to be the last one we take because I know it's pretty late for you. This is a little bit of pushback on your answer. I'm just going to let you answer this from Jeremiah. If we cannot test supernatural explanations, how can we make any theistic statements either in the positive or the negative?
Any theistic statements? What that language is kind of confusing me a little bit.
Jeremiah, if you're listening, can you type up a clarification comment on that?
I mean, like, basically kind of saying, like, how can we kind of claim that, like, a deity exists? Is that kind of where he's coming from? Because I mean, like, if that is, then I mean, like, people claim that all different types of things exist. Like, the reason why, like, people are kind of attacking deity as being kind of like somewhat special, I mean, like, you could say that a unicorn is like a supernatural thing, right? That doesn't naturally occur. So if we were to find one of those, it would be pretty much against the natural or the norm or whatever. The point is that, like, as of right now, we don't have a way of testing whether or not unicorns do or could exist. So until you have a reason to believe that something could exist or could be true, the default position is to disbelieve. It's not to believe that it doesn't, it's just to not believe either one. is to kind of be like neutral on it. So if you kind of take that out and kind of factor in God, if you don't have a way of testing for God, if that does exist, then the default position is to not believe.
Sure. And he did type a clarifying question on that. So like whether or not God exists. And I think the issue here is, if your standard of knowledge is scientifically testing things, and theistic statements, i.e., whether or not God exists. So I guess a theistic statement would be the proposition God exists, and you're saying we can't test that. That does lend itself towards a predisposition, which you did acknowledge. I guess my build on what he's saying, and I think this is what he's getting at, is that in epistemology founded upon the idea of testing, that automatically disincludes certain categories of knowledge, automatically excludes them. Our response to that shouldn't be, well, then we just by default have to say we can't know, but rather to ask the question, okay, is this a sufficient epistemology?
Yeah. So if we cannot test supernatural explanations, how can we make any theistic statements? And he said that a theistic statement would be whether God does or does not exist, either in the positive or negative. I guess the kind of proper answer to that then would be that you can make the claim, but unless you can back it up with the but in a natural, so if you can't test them, sorry, I'm just trying to think out loud about this.
That's okay.
If you cannot test a supernatural explanation, like people could make the assumption that it is a supernatural explanation, but because you cannot test it, you do rule it out, not necessarily because it's false, but because you cannot determine whether it is true or false, if that makes any sort of sense.
Sure.
So, I mean, like, this is not the greatest example because it's not exactly supernatural, but if you could just kind of see like where I'm kind of coming from. If I was to do so, if I was to cause a noise to happen off camera, right? Or that's like out of the shot of the camera, I could kind of say, oh, that that was a supernatural explanation, like it was a poltergeist that made that sound, right? We don't have a method of testing if that statement that it was a poltergeist is true or false. So whether or not it is true or false, if you cannot test for it, then you automatically have to kind of cast it aside and kind of say, no, there like let's go with the naturalistic explanations. If you can't find one, then you can kind of say, okay, well, look, we're not necessarily ruling it in, but this is just an unknown right now.
All right, thank you so much. And we could go on about this, but
oh god, yeah,
we could go on about this, but we are going to end the stream here. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on to the show, discussing this. It's a very interesting conversation. We really got into the weeds. Hopefully it was helpful for the people who are listening, watching on their computers. Once again, this is Stephen Ryan from Cider and Port. He has his own channel. If you liked what he said, go ahead and check him out. The link's down in the description below. You can follow him on Twitter and everything from there. This is Doulos Theology. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Chris. I'm going to be moving to our Discord server to field questions. I invited Stephen to come along, but it's quite late for him, so he's gonna go to bed. Unless last minute change of mind, you can still come along.
No, look, just for kind of reference, it is 20 past 3 in the morning right here. So there is
So
almost
Steven's going to go to bed.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to follow me to Discord, links down in the description below. Have a good night, everyone.